The sirens were getting closer, and Corinne Morrison stood in her driveway pointing at my house like she was directing an invasion. 3 police cruisers turned onto Maple Street, their red and blue lights painting our quiet neighborhood in emergency colors. Corinne's perfectly styled hair caught the flashing lights as she gestured wildly, her voice carrying across the street. "She is dangerous," Corinne shouted to the approaching officers. "Military people think they can do whatever they want." I stood in my doorway, still in my navy dress blues from the HOA meeting an hour earlier. 8 months aboard the USS Truman had prepared me for hostile waters, but nothing had prepared me for the suburban warfare that awaited me at home. As the officers stepped out of their vehicles, hands resting on their weapons, I realized Corinne Morrison had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The golden hour sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as I stepped out of my Honda Pilot, my sea bag slung over my shoulder. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, returning home after 8 months aboard the USS Truman. The suburban silence felt almost foreign compared to the constant hum of naval operations that had become my daily soundtrack. The manicured lawns and pristine driveways should have felt welcoming, but something was different. Something was wrong. The American flag I had left flying proudly in my front yard was gone. In its place, a stern white notice was taped to my front door like a declaration of war. I walked up the pathway Mark had maintained perfectly in my absence. Every flower bed was pristine, every blade of grass cut to regulation height. Yet as I peeled the first notice from my door, my blood began to boil. HOA violation, unauthorized flag display. The irony was not lost on me. Behind the first notice were more, and more. A stack of violation letters, each more ridiculous than the last. Mailbox height incorrect. Garbage can visible from street. Decorative wreath not approved by architectural committee. I stood there reading through the absurd complaints, my military training kicking in as I assessed the tactical situation I now faced on my own street. Well, 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 look who finally decided to come home. The sharp voice cut through the evening air like a blade. I turned to see a woman marching across the street with the confidence of someone who had never faced real authority. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and pressed blazer screamed suburban power trip, but I recognized the type immediately. Bullies who crumbled when faced with true leadership. "I am Corinne Morrison, HOA president," she announced, stopping just short of my property line. "And we need to talk." I kept my expression neutral, the same face I had worn during tense negotiations with foreign officials. "I am Lieutenant Commander Martinez. What seems to be the problem?" Corinne's laugh was sharp and condescending. "The problem is that military people think they are above the rules. Your husband has been completely uncooperative, and now you have 8 months of violations to address." I glanced at my immaculate yard, then back at Corinne. "What violations exactly?" "All of them," she snapped, gesturing at the notices in my hand. "And I want them corrected immediately. This is a respectable neighborhood, not some military base where you can do whatever you want." The dismissive tone in her voice when she said military told me everything I needed to know. This was not about property values or community standards. This was personal. This was prejudice dressed up in HOA bylaws and neighborhood regulations. "I will review these notices," I said calmly, "and address any legitimate concerns according to proper procedures." Corinne's face reddened. "Legitimate concerns? I am the HOA president. My concerns are the only ones that matter. You have 48 hours to fix everything, or I am taking legal action." She spun on her heel and marched back across the street, leaving me standing in my driveway with a stack of bogus violations and a clear picture of the enemy I was facing. As I watched her disappear into her house, I felt the familiar calm that preceded every major operation. Karen Morrison had just declared war on the wrong person. That night, Mark filled me in on the months I had missed. Karen had taken over the HOA presidency while I was deployed, and she had immediately begun targeting military families. The Johnsons down the street had sold their house and moved after months of harassment. The Rodriguezes were considering the same. "She has been relentless," Mark said, his voice tight with frustration. "Every week something new. The flag was just the beginning." I spread the violation notices across our kitchen table, studying each one with the methodical precision that had made me one of the Navy's most trusted intelligence officers. Every complaint, every demand, every threat painted a clear picture of systematic harassment. "She made one mistake," I said, looking up at my husband. "She picked the wrong target." Mark smiled for the first time in months. "What are you going to do?" I gathered the papers into a neat stack, my mind already working through the tactical situation. "I am going to give her exactly what she is asking for: perfect compliance with every rule, regulation, and procedure. And then we see what happens when a suburban tyrant meets actual authority." The Home Office became a command center as I spread HOA documents across my desk like battle plans. Years of intelligence analysis had taught me to spot patterns others missed, and Karen Morrison's reign of terror was full of them. I started with the HOA bylaws, cross-referencing every violation notice against the actual rules. The discrepancies were staggering. Half the violations Karen had cited were not even in the official documents. The other half were selectively enforced based on what appeared to be personal grudges rather than community standards. My phone rang at 800 hours. Linda Rodriguez, the military spouse from 3 streets over. "Sarah, thank God you are home," she said, her voice shaking. "I heard Karen went after you too." "Tell me everything," I said, grabbing a notepad. The story that emerged was worse than I had imagined. Karen had been systematically harassing military families for months. Violation notices for infractions that civilian neighbors ignored without consequence. Threats of legal action for minor issues that should have been handled with friendly reminders. Demands for immediate compliance with rules that did not exist. "She made Jenny Parker cry," Linda continued. "Jenny's husband is deployed to Afghanistan, and Karen showed up at her door screaming about her garden gnomes. Garden gnomes, Sarah. They were a gift from her daughter." I made careful notes, documenting every instance of harassment. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Military families were being targeted while civilian neighbors received gentle reminders at most. "Linda, I need you to document everything. Every interaction, every threat, every violation notice. Can you get the other families to do the same?" "Absolutely. We have been waiting for someone to stand up to her." After I hung up, I turned to my computer and began researching Karen Morrison herself. What I found was illuminating. Her husband, Derek Morrison, owned a small construction company that had bid on several military contracts over the past 2 years. Every bid had been rejected. The pieces clicked together like a puzzle solving itself. This was not random harassment. This was targeted retaliation against military families by someone who felt wronged by the system we represented. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Karen Morrison. You have 46 hours remaining to address all violations. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action." I stared at the message, then saved it to my evidence folder. Karen was documenting her own harassment campaign, making my job easier with every threat. Mark found me at the desk that evening, surrounded by documents and printouts. "How bad is it?" "Worse than I thought," I said, showing him the evidence I had compiled. "She has been running a systematic campaign against military families for months. The question is why." I told him about Derek Morrison's failed military contracts and watched understanding dawn on his face. "She is taking it out on all of us," he said quietly. "Yes, and that is going to be her downfall." The next morning brought another stack of violation notices, this time hand-delivered by Karen herself. She stood on my doorstep with a clipboard and a smug expression, like a drill sergeant inspecting troops. "I see you have not addressed any of the violations," she said, checking items off her list. "That is another violation for noncompliance." "I am reviewing all notices for accuracy," I replied calmly. "Accuracy?" Karen's voice rose an octave. "I am the HOA president. My word is final." Actually, the HOA bylaws specify a formal review process for all violations. I am exercising my right to that process. Karen's face turned red. "There is no review process. You fix the violations or you face the consequences." I pulled out my phone and began recording. "Could you repeat that, for the record?" She sputtered for a moment, then stormed off my porch. "You have 24 hours, she shouted over her shoulder. "Then I am calling the authorities." I watched her march back to her house, then saved the recording to my evidence file. Karen Morrison was about to learn that some authorities carried more weight than others. The community center fluorescent lights hummed overhead as residents filed into the monthly HOA meeting. I had requested this emergency session through proper channels, and Karen had been forced to comply despite her obvious reluctance. I arrived in my navy dress blues, every ribbon and decoration perfectly placed. The uniform sent a clear message about who I was and what I represented. Karen sat at the head table in her power suit, radiating false authority like a costume worn by someone playing a role they did not understand. The contrast was striking. Genuine leadership versus manufactured control. Real authority versus pretend power. "This meeting is called to order," Karen announced, her voice carrying the shrill edge of someone feeling threatened. "We have several important matters to discuss tonight." I took my seat in the front row, notepad ready, recording device visible on the table beside me. Other military families filled the seats around me, while civilian neighbors watched with obvious curiosity. "First item," Karen continued, "is the ongoing violation of community standards by certain residents who think they are above the rules." Her eyes fixed on me as she spoke, making her target clear to everyone present. "Military families have been particularly problematic," she said, her voice rising with each word. "They seem to think their service gives them special privileges. They ignore HOA regulations, display unauthorized decorations, and generally act like they own the neighborhood." The room fell silent. I could feel the tension building like electricity before a storm. "These freeloaders need to understand that military rank means nothing in civilian neighborhoods," Karen continued, her resentment now fully on display. "We will not tolerate entitled behavior from people who think they deserve special treatment." I stood slowly, my movement drawing every eye in the room. When I spoke, my voice carried the quiet authority that came from years of commanding respect in life-or-death situations. "Mrs. Morrison, I would like to request copies of all HOA proceedings and documentation of your authority to make these accusations. Corinne's face flushed. You are out of order. Actually, according to the HOA bylaws, any resident has the right to review official documents and proceedings. I am simply exercising that right. I do not have to provide you with anything, Corinne snapped. According to state law, you do. I pulled out a folder and began reading. The Texas Property Code requires HOA boards to maintain transparent records and provide access to residents upon request. Failure to comply is a violation of state law. The room murmured as residents processed this information. Corinne's authority was being challenged in front of everyone, and she clearly did not like it. You cannot intimidate me with your military tactics, she said, her voice cracking. I am not intimidating anyone. I am requesting proper documentation and procedures, which is every resident's right. An elderly man in the back row stood up. I would like to see those documents too. I have been wondering about some of the recent rule changes. Another resident nodded. Me too. Some of these new violations seem pretty arbitrary. Corinne's control was slipping, and everyone could see it. She banged her gavel frantically, trying to restore order. This meeting is about compliance, not documentation, she shouted. Military families will follow the rules, or they will face the consequences. I remained standing, my presence a calm center in the growing storm. What consequences specifically? Legal action, fines, liens on your property, whatever it takes to bring you into compliance. With what authority? I am the HOA president. That gives you specific powers outlined in the bylaws, not unlimited authority to harass residents. Corinne's face was now completely red. You think you are so smart with your fancy uniform and your military training. Well, let me tell you something. This is not the Navy. This is my neighborhood and I make the rules here. She pointed her finger at me like a weapon. Military rank means nothing in civilian neighborhoods. You are just another resident, and you will follow my rules or face the consequences. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Corinne had just revealed her true feelings about military families in front of the entire community. I sat down calmly and made notes while Corinne continued her tirade. She was digging her own grave with every word, and I was documenting it all. This meeting is adjourned, Corinne announced, apparently realizing she had said too much. As residents filed out, several approached me to offer support. The military families looked relieved to finally have someone standing up to Corinne's bullying. Thank you, Linda Rodriguez whispered as she passed. Someone needed to say something. I watched Corinne pack up her materials, her hands shaking with rage. As she headed for the door, she stopped beside my chair. You think you won something tonight, she said quietly. But I have news for you. Military rank means nothing here. I am going to destroy you. I looked up at her with the same calm expression I had worn during hostile negotiations with foreign officials. Mrs. Morrison, I strongly suggest you review the HOA bylaws and your actual authority before making any more threats. She stormed out of the community center, leaving me alone with the evidence of her public meltdown. I had everything I needed to end her reign of terror, but Corinne Morrison was about to make it even easier. The chess match had begun in earnest, and I recognized every move from Corinne's playbook. The formal complaints to city and county officials arrived within days of the HOA meeting, each one more desperate than the last. Corinne was trying to legitimize her authority by involving outside agencies, but my investigation had revealed the rot at the core of her operation. HOA bylaws had been altered without proper voting procedures. Enforcement had been selectively applied based on personal vendettas. Financial irregularities suggested Karen was treating the HOA like her personal bank account. I spread the evidence across my desk like a prosecutor preparing for trial. Every doctored document, every illegal rule change, every instance of discrimination painted a clear picture of systematic abuse of power. My phone rang at 1400 hours. Mark's voice was tight with concern. "Sarah, you need to know what is happening in the neighborhood." "Tell me." "Karen is spreading rumors. She is telling people that military families get special government benefits that make us think we are better than everyone else. She is saying we do not pay our fair share of taxes and that we expect special treatment." I felt my jaw clench. The rumor campaign was Karen's most predictable move, but also her most dangerous. Lies spread faster than truth in small communities. "She is also telling people that you threatened her at the meeting," Mark continued. "That you used your military training to intimidate her. Anyone who was there knows that is not true. The problem is, not everyone was there, and Karen is very convincing when she wants to be." I made notes as Mark spoke, documenting this new phase of Karen's campaign. She was escalating, which meant she was feeling cornered. Cornered animals were dangerous, but they also made mistakes. The next morning brought the most outrageous demand yet. Karen stood on my doorstep with a clipboard and a court summons, her smile triumphant. "I am here to conduct a final inspection," she announced. "You have failed to address any of the violations, so I am forced to take legal action." She gestured at a man with a camera standing behind her. "This is my documentation specialist. He will be recording everything for the court." I stepped onto my porch and closed the door behind me. "You do not have permission to enter my property." "I do not need permission. I have HOA authority." "Show me the specific bylaw that gives you that authority." Karen's smile faltered. "I do not have to show you anything. I am the president." "Actually, you do. Any inspection of private property requires specific authorization and proper notice. You have provided neither." The man with the camera looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, if she is saying we do not have the right to be here." "We have every right," Karen snapped. "She is just trying to intimidate us." I pulled out my phone and began recording. "For the record, you are attempting to enter my property without permission or proper authorization. Is that correct?" Karen's face reddened. "Stop recording me." "This is my property. I have every right to record what happens here." She pointed at the American flag I had rehung in my front yard. "That flag is in violation of HOA regulations. It needs to come down immediately." "Under what authority?" "HOA bylaws prohibit unauthorized displays." I smiled for the first time in days. Actually, federal law explicitly protects the right of military families to display the American flag. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005 supersedes any local regulations. Karen's eyes widened. She had not expected me to know federal law. "Furthermore," I continued, "any attempt to prevent military families from displaying patriotic symbols could be considered discrimination under federal civil rights laws." "I do not care about federal law," Karen shouted. "This is my neighborhood and you will follow my rules." I stopped recording and looked directly at her. "Mrs. Morrison, I strongly suggest you educate yourself about federal protections for military families before making any more demands." "Are you threatening me?" "I am informing you of the law." Corinne's face was now completely red. You think you are so smart. You think your military rank protects you from everything. Well, let me tell you something. I have connections in this city. I have friends in law enforcement. One phone call from me and you will be in handcuffs. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Corinne had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Mrs. Morrison, I said quietly, I encourage you to make that call. Her eyes widened at my calm response. What? I said make the call. If you believe law enforcement should be involved in this matter, then by all means involve them. Corinne stared at me for a long moment, clearly not expecting this response. She had threatened to call the police as an intimidation tactic, but I was calling her bluff. Fine, she said, pulling out her phone. You want to play hardball, let's play hardball. She dialed 911 while standing in my driveway, her voice shaking with fake urgency. This is Corinne Morrison on Maple Street. I need officers here immediately. We have a situation with a military person who is threatening neighborhood safety. I watched her performance with professional detachment. Corinne Morrison had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and she had no idea what was about to happen. As she hung up the phone, I smiled at her one final time. Mrs. Morrison, you have no idea who you are dealing with. The sirens were already getting closer. The sound of sirens shattered the suburban tranquility as 3 police cruisers converged on Maple Street. Their red and blue lights painted the neighborhood in emergency colors, drawing residents from their homes like moths to a flame. Corinne stood in her driveway like a general commanding troops, pointing dramatically at my house while officers approached with hands resting on their weapons. The scene was pure theater, designed to humiliate and intimidate. But I had faced down armed pirates in international waters. Suburban drama held no terror for me. I emerged from my front door with military bearing, my identification ready and my demeanor calm as a mountain lake. The lead officer, a tall man with graying temples, approached with professional caution. Ma'am, we received a call about a disturbance, he said, his voice measured. Officer, I replied, extending my military ID, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, United States Navy. There is no disturbance here. The officer's expression changed the moment he saw my credentials. His posture shifted from confrontation to respect as he recognized what he was dealing with. Lieutenant Commander, he said, studying my ID carefully, what seems to be the problem here? Before I could respond, Corinne's voice cut through the air like a siren. She is threatening me, Corinne shouted, marching toward us. She is using her military training to intimidate residents. I want her arrested immediately. The officer looked between Corinne and me, clearly trying to assess the situation. 2 other officers flanked him, their hands no longer resting on their weapons. Ma'am, the lead officer said to Corinne, what exactly happened here? She threatened me when I tried to conduct a legitimate HOA inspection. She said she would use her military connections to destroy me. I remained silent, letting Corinne dig her own grave with false accusations. Lieutenant Commander, the officer said to me, is that accurate? Officer, I have been documenting everything. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from our confrontation. Corinne's voice filled the air, threatening to have me arrested, claiming she did not care about federal law and making discriminatory comments about military families. The officer's expression darkened as he listened. When the recording ended, he looked at Corinne with obvious suspicion. Ma'am, based on this recording, it sounds like you were the one making threats. That recording is fake, Corinne sputtered. She is trying to manipulate you." "Mrs. Morrison," I said calmly, "these officers are trained professionals. They can recognize authentic evidence." Karen's face turned red with rage. "You think you are so smart. You think your uniform and your rank give you special privileges. Well, let me tell you something about military people." She launched into a tirade about military families being entitled freeloaders who expected special treatment. With each word, she revealed the deep prejudice that had driven her campaign of harassment. The officers exchanged glances. What had started as a domestic disturbance call was turning into something much more serious. "Ma'am," the lead officer said to Corinne, "I need you to calm down." "Do not tell me to calm down," Corinne shouted. "I am the HOA president. I have authority here. You work for the taxpayers and I am a taxpayer." The officer's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, you do not give me orders." "I know the mayor," Corinne continued, her voice rising to a shriek. "I know the police chief. One phone call from me and you will be directing traffic in the worst part of town." The transformation was complete. Corinne had gone from playing victim to threatening law enforcement officers. The very people she had called for help were now her targets. "Lieutenant Commander," the lead officer said to me, "do you have any other documentation of this harassment?" I pulled out a folder containing weeks of evidence. "Officer, I have documented a systematic campaign of discrimination against military families in this neighborhood. Mrs. Morrison has been selectively enforcing HOA rules, making threats, and now attempting to use law enforcement to intimidate residents." The officer reviewed the evidence with growing concern. Violation notices for non-existent infractions, recordings of discriminatory statements, documentation of selective enforcement. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, looking up from the papers, "this is very serious. You could be facing charges of harassment and discrimination." "You cannot arrest me," Corinne screamed. "I am the HOA president. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," the officer said, reaching for his handcuffs. That was when Corinne made her final, fatal mistake. She swung at the officer, her fist connecting with his shoulder in a pathetic attempt at assault. The takedown was swift and professional. Within seconds, Corinne Morrison was face down on her own driveway, hands cuffed behind her back, screaming about corruption and military conspiracies. As they loaded her into the police cruiser, I felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful operation. Corinne Morrison's reign of terror was over, but the investigation was just beginning. The suburban battlefield had shifted dramatically as I spread my evidence across the hood of the police cruiser like a seasoned prosecutor presenting her case. Detective Reynolds, a 20-year veteran with sharp eyes and graying hair, leaned in with growing interest. "Lieutenant Commander, walk me through this from the beginning," he said, his notebook ready. I organized the documents chronologically, each piece of evidence building upon the last. Every violation notice, every recorded conversation, every carefully cataloged instance of harassment told the story of a systematic campaign that had torn through our neighborhood like a virus. "It started the day I returned from deployment," I began, pointing to the first violation notice. 8 months at sea, and I come home to find my American flag removed and replaced with this." Detective Reynolds studied the notice, his expression growing more serious. "Unauthorized flag display. That is interesting, considering federal law." "It gets worse." I showed him the pattern of selective enforcement. Military families receiving citations for infractions that civilian neighbors ignored without consequence. Threats of legal action for minor issues. demands for immediate compliance with rules that did not exist in the official HOA bylaws. Mrs. Morrison has been systematically targeting military families, I continued. The evidence shows clear discrimination based on military status. How many families are we talking about? At least 6 that I can document. 2 families sold their homes and moved away because of the harassment. Detective Reynolds shook his head in disbelief. This is extensive. Have you determined a motive? I pulled out the final piece of the puzzle. Derek Morrison, her husband, owns Morrison Construction. Over the past 2 years, his company has bid on several military contracts. Every bid was rejected. The detective's eyes widened. So this is retaliation. Personal revenge disguised as community standards. Behind us, Corinne's voice echoed from the police cruiser, where she was demanding to speak to the mayor, the governor, and anyone else who would listen to her claims of military conspiracy. There is more, I said, pulling out the financial documents. I believe Mrs. Morrison has been embezzling HOA funds. Detective Reynolds examined the bank statements and receipts I had gathered. These look like personal expenses charged to the HOA account. Salon appointments, restaurant meals, shopping trips, all justified as community business, but clearly personal in nature. How much are we talking about? At least $15,000 over the past 6 months. The detective whistled low. That takes this from harassment to felony fraud. Officer Martinez, who had been listening to our conversation, approached with his own notebook. Lieutenant Commander, I need to ask you about Mrs. Morrison's claims that you threatened her. I pulled out my phone and played the complete recording of our confrontation. Corinne's voice filled the air, threatening to have me arrested, claiming she did not care about federal law, and making discriminatory comments about military families. As you can hear, I said when the recording ended, Mrs. Morrison was the one making threats. I simply informed her of federal protections for military families. This recording is admissible in court, Officer Martinez confirmed. It clearly shows who was doing the threatening. Detective Reynolds closed his notebook and looked at the mountain of evidence spread across the cruiser hood. Lieutenant Commander, this is one of the most comprehensive cases of harassment and discrimination I have seen in 20 years. You have built a federal case here. I documented everything the way I was trained to document intelligence operations. Complete, accurate, and verifiable. The FBI is going to want to see this. Civil rights violations, potential retaliation against military families, federal crimes. This is bigger than a neighborhood dispute. As if summoned by our conversation, more vehicles began arriving. Unmarked sedans with federal plates. Agents in dark suits with serious expressions. The investigation was expanding beyond the local level. Corinne's screaming from the police cruiser reached a new pitch when she saw the federal agents. "This is a conspiracy," she shouted. "They are all working together to destroy me." Agent Williams, a tall woman with steel-gray hair, approached me with professional courtesy. "Lieutenant Commander Martinez, I am Agent Williams, FBI. We need to discuss Mrs. Morrison's activities." Agent Williams, I have documented evidence of systematic harassment, discrimination, and fraud. We know. We have been investigating Derek Morrison's business practices for months. Your complaint about his wife's retaliation against military families gives us the final piece we needed. The scope of the investigation was becoming clear. This was not just about HOA harassment. This was about a pattern of retaliation against military personnel that extended far beyond our suburban neighborhood. How long has this been going on? I asked. Derek Morrison's company has been blacklisted from military contracts for fraudulent billing practices. We believe his wife's campaign against military families was part of a broader pattern of retaliation. As agents swarmed Corinne's house with search warrants, neighbors emerged from their homes to witness the end of an era. The woman who had terrorized our community for months was being led away in handcuffs, her carefully constructed authority crumbling like a house of cards. Detective Reynolds handed me his card. "Lieutenant Commander, you did excellent work here. This case is going to protect a lot of military families." I watched the federal agents carry boxes of evidence from Corinne's house, knowing that justice was finally being served. Sometimes the best victories were the ones that protected others from facing the same battles you had fought alone. Justice moved swiftly once the federal investigation began. Corinne Morrison's house of cards collapsed under the weight of her own crimes, each charge more serious than the last. The local charges were extensive: harassment, discrimination, fraud, embezzlement, impersonation of legal authority, each carrying penalties that would follow her for years to come. The federal charges were even more devastating: civil rights violations, retaliation against military families, conspiracy to defraud government contractors. The FBI had been building a case against Derek Morrison's business practices for months, and Corinne's campaign of harassment provided the final evidence they needed. I stood in my kitchen reading the morning newspaper, the headline blazing across the front page: HOA President Charged with Anti-Military Discrimination. The article detailed the systematic harassment campaign that had driven military families from their homes and the fraudulent activities that had lined Corinne's pockets. My phone rang at 800 hours. Detective Reynolds' voice was professional but satisfied. "Lieutenant Commander, I wanted to update you on the case. Corinne Morrison pled guilty to all charges yesterday." "What is the sentence?" 3 years in prison for the fraud charges, 5 years probation, full restitution to the HOA and affected families, and she is permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Justice had been served, but the impact went far beyond punishment. What about her husband? Derek Morrison is facing federal charges for contract fraud and retaliation. The FBI found evidence that he had been using his wife's HOA position to gather intelligence on military families for his vendetta against the military contracting system. The scope of their operation was staggering. Corinne's harassment campaign had been part of a broader pattern of retaliation that extended far beyond our neighborhood. The HOA board, finally free from Corinne's intimidation, voted unanimously to remove her from all positions and launch a comprehensive audit of the association's finances. The results were even worse than expected. $37,000, Mark said, shaking his head as he read the audit report. She stole $37,000 from the neighborhood. "And that is just what they found," I replied. "The forensic accountants are still digging." The transformation of our neighborhood was remarkable. The emergency HOA meeting to elect new leadership was packed with residents who had been silent during Corinne's reign of terror. The vote was unanimous: Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez for HOA President. "I accept this position with the understanding that leadership is service," I said in my acceptance speech. "My goal is to create a community where all residents are treated with dignity and respect." The first order of business was establishing new policies protecting all residents from discrimination. Military families, elderly residents, single parents, renters, everyone deserved equal treatment under HOA rules. The second was financial transparency. Every HOA expenditure would be documented and approved by the board. No more personal shopping trips disguised as community business. The third was proper procedures. No more arbitrary rule changes or selective enforcement. Everything would be done according to established bylaws and state law. Within weeks, the changes were visible. The Johnson family, who had sold their home to escape Karen's harassment, inquired about buying back in. The Rodriguezes canceled their plans to move. New military families began looking at homes in our neighborhood. "People are talking," Linda Rodriguez told me during a neighborhood barbecue. "They are saying this is the best managed HOA in the county." Property values reflected the change. Our neighborhood became known for its professional management and welcoming atmosphere. Real estate agents used our HOA as a selling point for prospective buyers. The federal investigation revealed that Karen and Derek Morrison's campaign of retaliation had affected military families across 3 states. Dozens of complaints were filed, and the FBI established a task force to investigate discrimination against military personnel. "Your case became the model for federal civil rights enforcement," Agent Williams told me during a follow-up interview. "The evidence you gathered has been used in 6 other investigations." 6 months after Karen's arrest, I stood in my backyard watching the neighborhood's first annual